From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
How do you feel about paying more for using a credit card? You may have to do that now, thanks to a new state law that just went into effect. You may also have to pay more in property taxes if a school bond issue passes this year in the district where you live. However, some of those bond elections are being delayed. We'll discuss why. But first, the 2025 legislative session is now underway. We'll discuss the priorities and the politics that come into play as the Democrat governor and Republican-controlled legislature square off. Join us right now for Kansas Week. Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jared Cerullo. The 2025 legislative session convened this week on Monday. The Republican supermajority getting to work very quickly on an agenda that Democrats are hoping will include some compromises. CAKE's Pilar Pedraza reports on Governor Laura Kelly's State of the State address, followed by Nick Nelson with Republican reaction.
As I think about our state's future, I keep coming back to the same thought. How do we embrace change? How do we embrace opportunity? How do we embrace innovation, but do it in the Kansas way?
After running through the traditional roll call of accomplishments, the governor dove into the meat of her speech, looking to protect Kansas' future. She spoke first about taking care of the youngest Kansans by finding a solution to the shortage of daycare slots Cake News has been reporting on for the last couple of years.
All of this would be so much easier if we eliminated the red tape that makes it so difficult for so many families to access services and for child care providers to even operate.
She wants to take the 4 different state agencies that currently oversee the various aspects of daycares and create a single Office of Early Childhood. She also promised her budget will continue to fully fund public schools and that she'll continue to reject any attempt to route public money to private schools, whether that's through vouchers, educational savings accounts, or any other method.
We cannot risk our state's financial stability by implementing any semblance of the reckless tax experiment that devastated our schools a dozen years ago.
She also promised to continue to fight attempts to cut corporate taxes. She said she'd prefer to postpone any tax cut talk until next year, once we have a better idea of how the most recent tax cuts will fully affect Kansas's budget. But she says she's open to proposals that pay for themselves.
But there's one thing that is seriously concerning, and that's our dwindling water supply. Forget making it 75 years down the road. Some parts of western Kansas don't have groundwater enough to last another 25 years.
She set a goal to have each generation work to secure water for the next 2 generations, calling it the multi-generational promise. Like daycares, she wants to simplify the state's water management system by combining this time 14 different agencies involved into one Office of Natural Resources. And she wants to invest more money into the fight to protect Kansas water.
I will propose another $30 million above what the legislature added, bringing our overall water investment dollars to $90 million every single year.
She's talking about being physically conservative. I mean, that's what she talks about out there. But then she proposes all of these spending increases on different things. So, we are going to actually go through that process during the budget and set our priorities, and we'll decide where we're going to spend that money.
The Republican leaders of the House and Senate say they're wanting to see if Governor Laura Kelly can make good on her promise to help Republicans on property tax reform. Senate President Ty Masterson says many of the accomplishments the governor mentioned were the result of Republican bills.
I was sitting there listening to her opening statement. I was very proud of her. She listed a whole list of things that we all did. Right, there's not I'd like, what's one thing she listed that wasn't something Republicans put on her desk?
Representative Nick Hoheisel agreed with Masterson, saying Kelly's changed her tune on property tax reform since the Republican victory in November.
She will absolutely not entertain any property tax cuts for 2025. Now she's changed her tune and she's open to tax cuts for 2025.
Governor Kelly's fellow Democrat John Carmichael says he was thoroughly impressed with the governor's look toward the future.
She addressed the important issues. She laid out future plans. The most important thing is she reminded us us the lower quarter of the way into the 21st century.
A lot to unpack there. Here to discuss this and some of this week's other big stories are Wichita Eagle opinion editor Dion Leffler, former Democrat state legislator Tim Hodge of North Newton, and former Wichita City Councilman Brian Fry. Thank you all for joining us. And Tim Hodge, I'll start with you since you were a state lawmaker at one point. A lot to unpack. We'll talk property taxes first. Let me ask you about that. It seemed that the governor is not willing to discuss any more property tax relief this year, but we did just get the sales tax on food reduced to zero. So she's betting on that, it sounds like.
Okay, I'm a big champion of the food sales tax reduction elimination. Started the conversation back in 2016. I could show you the palm cards where my kids were 10 years younger. Any event, I'm glad that's finally taken place. I commend the legislature for taking that issue and bringing it to an end. It should have been done a long time ago. But the property tax thing, I think it's a lot like the Social Security reduction last year. It's going to help some. The state's 20 mills that they have on valuations above $75,000. It's not going to help a lot of people. And I know it's a great talking point. I know Social Security income tax reduction is a great talking point, but most of that Social Security income was already exempt, and that only helped the people that were making lots and lots of other money to keep Social Security from being taxed. But in the property tax point, I mean, yeah, eliminate it on the state level. But the real group that needs to deal with property taxes are your cities and counties. Those are the folks that are making the mill levies as high as they are. And if my Republican friends are serious about that, they're going to get with a lot of the local communities, the cities and the counties, and say, your property taxes are too high. Yeah. And people are being taxed out of their homes. Folks are renting their homes from the government every year. And because if you look at the numbers for the state's reduction, it's going to end up being like $180 maybe for a year, and that's not enough. Yeah. So everyone's going to go crazy about this property tax thing. It's fine, but I want to see real reduction for people, for the average family, for their cost of living to actually come down, because people are being taxed out of their homes right now.
Brian Fry, do you agree? I know you're not normally a state, you don't pontificate normally on state politics, being a former city councilman, but what's your response?
I mean, we hear this in the business community all the time. Kansas is a mid-level tax burden state. We're 25th in the business tax climate out of 50 states. And so we're middle of the road. We're high tax on property, we're high tax on sales, we're high tax on business income tax. And that's affecting us regionally, competitiveness. When Kansas has to compete with Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Missouri on that. Part of that equation is property taxes. And we hear that during this last campaign cycle. That was on everyone's lips, lower my property tax. Valuations is a big part of that, and that makes it very difficult, right? So there has to be some real reform there. I love how the governor continues to say, failed tax experiment, whereas they're also having this failed revenue hoarding, where the income for the state has been high for the last several years. There is capacity to do something. Right. Sales tax on food was one element of it, but there needs to be real reduction on property tax. Yeah.
Dion, Brian Fry seems to be saying that, when Sam Brownback was governor and we had that experiment, so to say, that we cut so much, we cut too much maybe, and now it's the complete opposite. The state is raking in so much more money, surpluses all over the place, and they still want more.
Well, on the property tax, I spent quite a bit of time this week analyzing the Senate concurrent resolution that's been introduced. And I was shocked at how closely that mirrors part of Proposition 13 in California. Basically, it would cap the assessments at 3% increase per year. California caps them at 2%. But the So, but capping the, just capping the increases doesn't really make that much difference. Where California's Proposition 13 worked was that it capped the amount that they could take. They 1% of the property value, and
so they can still raise it, but to a limit,
yeah,
basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's 1% of whatever you paid for your house. You pay 1%.
Yeah.
Plus, they can raise the valuation of your house 2%
Yeah.
a year, and it works.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why we'd just take half of it. I mean, we ought to implement the whole thing.
One more thing I want to talk about before we have to move on is a talking point that seems to come up every year is Medicaid expansion. Do you think we'll see any sort of item on Medicaid expansion, Tim?
I don't know, but I mean, we should. I mean, it's something that will help Kansans pay their medical bills. I don't understand why we are against that, but we should see. People need affordable health care. They need a health care system that's not going to bankrupt them when they go to the hospital. But I mean, one of the things that the problem, just go back on that topic a little bit, is one of the things that the legislature loves to do is like argue about sales tax on food. They'll put like a penny reduction on the sales tax on food, but in that same bill, you'll have a giant corporate income tax relief bill that regular people don't see, or a giant high income earner reduction. And then they'll say, if you vote against that, and that will lower the revenues of the state to the point where the governor says things like we have to be responsible. But then they'll say, well, that bill was all about the sales tax on food. You voted against that. So that's going to be the common dance that gets played. We need bills that only have one issue in them. It's difficult to do with all the people up there.
Yes.
But then the messaging has to be, this wasn't a sales tax reduction bill. This was an income tax reduction bill for the rich or the most fortunate among us. So if they shroud a property tax reduction bill with a bunch of corporate giveaways or high income earner giveaways, then that's probably not going to go away. And I already said the property tax at the state level, mill levy, that's not where the savings needs to be. The savings is at the county, city levels. Those are the entities that need to examine their budgets to give people real relief at their property taxes.
Yeah, and the city of Wichita hasn't raised their property mill levy in almost 30 years.
But the values went up.
Values went, and we talked about this earlier. The property valuations formula has to be addressed.
And we have a mechanism for folks to show up to those meetings, but they have to know about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to figure that out.
It's so hard to get the word out for people, and a lot of voters are older, quite frankly, and may not be able to be as accessible to those meetings too. But yes, that does seem to be the norm. I need to move on, though. We need to move on to our next topic with the Wichita School District's call for a $500 million bond issue. Speaking of taxes, that's part of a record-breaking year of requests by Kansas schools. Kansas districts are asking to borrow more money through bond issues than the state can even allow. That's forcing some school boards to postpone their bond votes until the next fiscal year. KSN's Derek Lytle explains.
School leaders across the state asking for bond issues.
So that just goes to a lot of schools really taking a look at projects in their communities.
Hutchinson Public Schools asking for $109.5 million. Their superintendent, Don Johnson, says their ask would have pushed the state over the money cap, but others can ask for less before the deadline.
Many other schools come in between now and June 30th and would be assessed against that bond cap less than $27 million, then their projects may get approved. But like us, anyone exceeding that would then only be approved going forward for after a July 1 date.
The cap set by state leaders to protect against budget shortfalls. Kansas State Department of Education Board member Jim Porter says it is necessary given the roughly 85 districts eligible to submit a request.
Years ago, the legislature became very concerned about the fact that a lot of school districts are passing bond issues that got state aid, and they couldn't budget because they had no idea. I mean, it was like a blank check.
He says school bonds are now rated in priority, with things like enrollment increases and ADA bathroom accommodations taking the front line of those requests. A big reason why some projects were approved while others, like Hutch's, has to wait.
The Goddard School District was the only one that met the priority of significant increase in enrollment.
Here for you, Derek Lytle, KSN News 3.
And Diane, I'll start with you about this. The package, the story package there didn't mention the Wichita bond issue that is coming up in February, but that's a notable item, a $410 or $420 million ask for the next 20 years or so. The state, I don't think a lot of people realize that the state, when voters passed a bond issue in a specific district, the state matched some of that money. As much as 20 or 25%. That has started to, years ago, bankrupt the state, and they've reduced that number. Are you familiar with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that wasn't what bankrupted the state.
Part of it.
Not even close, frankly.
Okay.
I mean, it was some very ill-considered tax policy that almost bankrupted the state. But, you know, I have a problem with the way that they're doing this, and it's. And we have not yet taken a position on the Wichita school bond. We're still analyzing that.
The Eagle.
Yeah,
right.
before the paper takes a position. But you know, this as they talked about in the package there, you know, Goddard, for example, has a lot of people coming in, and you know, the other people of Goddard have to pay for that growth. And that's kind of an issue for me. Where I came from, developers had to pay for that. If you built a large project, you built a school along with it. And if you built a small project, then you paid an impact fee to the city or to the local school district to help build the infrastructure to take care of the kids that you're bringing to this to this place. So it just kind of, you know, I've just kind of felt like, you know, this whole process is just kind of broken, and you know, it's and the other thing too is, you know, I mean, if you got one district that's got a bunch of new kids coming in, and you got another district that's got a bunch of 50-year-old crumbling buildings, you know, why does this one have precedence over this one? I don't know.
Yeah. Tim Hodge, any response?
Quickly, the bankrupt the state comment, that was the LLC exemption. That was cutting taxes for the wealthy, and you can look at those numbers to see how much that reduced the state income. So it wasn't, the schools had been going along just fine up until that point, until that self-inflicted tax policy wound happened. The problem I have with some of this situation is, you mentioned it, but I don't think the piece did, is it takes a while to pay these things back. Yeah. And the problem that I think the legislature is seeing, and that a lot of folks are seeing, are that some of these communities may not last the length of these bond issues. And I think that's a hard thing to say. Sorry. But it's...
and for Wichita,
that's not a problem.
They're talking about this bond issue being only phase one. They're talking about a three-phase, we're talking 50, 60 years down the line.
And so the other ingredient in this is the state legislature and maybe the state board is also talking about, well, where do these private schools come in to take up this burden, this job of education, right? So they don't know how much that's going to play into it. So I can see why they're doing it. I don't agree with it, but I can see why they're halting things, because they don't know how long these communities are going to last, and they don't know how much private education is going to impact public education. And that's frankly up to the voters of Kansas to see what they're going to instill here.
And let's face it, especially in these smaller rural school districts that continue to lose population.
And they vote the way they vote.
Yeah.
Well, and to that end, I think Wichita, their school bond issue is going to be a very difficult challenge, because they are losing students.
Yeah.
Just not the rural, smaller communities.
Yeah.
The Wichita School District is losing students, and it's to the Goddards and the Derbys and the Andovers and the Mazes, because they have a better quality system, because they've built new buildings, they've done bond issues, They've upgraded their facilities. They've paid for teachers. They've paid for this bond issue that 259 is proposing doesn't do anything for the students. It's just infrastructure that they should have been taking care of. But yet last year they closed schools, and now they're wanting to close schools again, but yet pass a $405 million tax bond when it should be expiring, which would be a reduction on your property taxes, that local element that you talked about. So it's going to be a big challenge.
From the city and county, though.
From the school board.
From the
school board. But it's still a local.
We want schools.
But it's still a local tax that could be coming off if they'd managed their properties properly and taken care of the facilities. Then it would be a reduction in your tax burden.
I like this. Being a former school board member, I always got frustrated because the county would present their budget, then the city would present their budget. They'd always have a 10 mil increase. And then it came time for the school to deal with theirs, and the community was taxed out. Yeah. And the school always got the third shot at the budget, and we could never do anything. So when schools, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but maybe saying that they're mismanaging, they're in a tight spot already, and they have to pay folks to show up, and it's a difficult
it is
entity to be on.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to move on. We're going to have to leave that conversation there, though. You might find yourself paying more for the convenience of using a credit card very soon. A new state law going into effect this month allows businesses to charge different prices for cash or credit card purchases. KSN's Zena Taher takes a look.
In the 1980s, Kansas businesses were allowed to make discounts for customers who paid cash. A federal court found that law unconstitutional in 2021.
From 2021 until January 1st, the law was kind of in a state of flux, and arguably there was no law.
Starting January 1st, instead of being able to offer cash discounts, business owners are allowed to add surcharges for credit card customers as long as they post clear signage indicating there's an extra fee.
This is a chance for the merchants, for the businesses, to just say, hey, here's our fee. This is what it's going to look like. That way there's no deception involved.
Shoppers have mixed feelings.
It makes sense that they have the option to cover their cost of that 4% cost of people using the card.
Johnny Sutton says as someone who always uses cash, the change doesn't affect him. Others don't like the shift in rules.
They have focused us so much on using our cards for everything, so you don't need to carry around cash, you don't need your checkbooks.
She says cards are her default method of payment.
Now they're going to charge us for leading us down that path.
Both say they haven't seen any businesses charging an extra fee yet.
Diane, I'll start with you. This is odd. We're talking about credit card fees here. It seems like we're continuing to move on to this cashless society, and there's good and bad points about that as well. But there has to be, these credit card companies have to make money. And so here we are, we have to pay for the convenience of using credit.
Yeah, it's, I hate this.
Yeah,
it's like,
I do too.
This, it just kind of galls me because, as you say, we're moving to, all these different things, with, the online purchasing and whatnot, and it's just a pain to, pull into a gas station, and there's the credit price and there's the cash price, and it's like, who's carrying cash? They won't take a check. I mean, it's annoying.
It's interesting, though. I think at least businesses that I have patronized over the last few years at least, some have already been operating with this. I see, I bought a big ticket item here a few years ago myself, and they offered a cash price and a regular price, They offered a regular price and a cash discount price. If you pay with cash, they'll give you a discount. So this is it seems like this has already been operating.
Well, go ahead. I think that was ruled unconstitutional, actually.
Yeah. Right.
And so they had to stop doing it that way. So go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's why we have this. They used to give you a cash discount because the retailer had to pay the credit card company that opportunity to use their system. And so it was a cost to the retailer. Now it's going to be borne on by us because we're going to have to pay that convenience fee, or we pay cash. which is not as convenient because no one carries cash
Right.
anymore. Look, I'm trying to reduce and eliminate all of my credit cards and just carry debit cards or cash and just do it that way.
And it's interesting, this law does not affect debit cards. It's only credit card purchases. So yeah. Tim Hodge, any comment here?
No, it comes down to the cost of living, you know, and to me, it's analogous to a government sales tax. This is a bank's sales tax. And, you know, it's people get upset on little petty sales tax. You had a Boston Tea Party over the whole deal. And so, I mean, do it. I don't know how long people are going to put up with it. I guess we'll go to debit cards. I guess we'll go to cash. But it's the retailer has to pay a fee. If now the person has to pay an additional fee to use it. And you said banks have to make money. Okay, I'll give you that.
You know, I guess the option in my case is I try to, it doesn't always happen like all of us, you know, I try to pay off that credit card bill every single month. So I'm not paying those fees.
The high interest.
Yeah, but many people can't do that.
But your bill's going to be 2-3% higher too.
And now it seems like they're forcing, you know, they're forcing the consumer to pay even more fees.
Well, and they're collecting on both ends.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's like they're collecting from you when you pay the interest on your credit card.
Now they're going to collect on this.
And they're collecting on the merchant for allowing you to use the credit card. And the thing is, it's like, you know what? When they start charging these, extra fees for using the credit card, are they going to reduce prices? I don't think so.
No.
You know, I mean,
well, we've seen that with the COVID and everything that went up has stayed up.
Yeah, I mean, they're not gonna cut the price. They're just gonna add another 3% onto what you pay. You know, it's just more inflation.
So is this good or bad for businesses then?
This is bad. This is bad. It's a cost of living problem. But if this is what Kansans vote for, if this is a policy that a legislature or a local government will put in there, and Kansas voted for them, then maybe it's going to take the pain of these kind of situations to wise up and say, we need to vote for different people.
But the credit card fees are already baked into the price we're paying for goods.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not going to change.
So this is actually good for the retailers because now they don't have to pay the service charge.
Yeah.
So it's good for them. It's bad for the consumer.
All right. That's a wrap for this week. Thanks to Dion Leffler, Tim Hodges, and Brian Fry for being here. Also, thanks to Cake and KSN for sharing their stories with us. I'm Jared Cerullo. We appreciate you watching. See you next week.